Hello guys, welcome to your Bitcoin report. Glad to have everyone here. Now, what I want to talk about is, first I'm going to talk about first mover advantage and why it's so important. Let's get the charts open and take a look at some stuff right here. And what we got going on is, now you're not going to understand how I'm fitting this together right away, but I'll get to the point, Mining in Afghanistan. The previously unknown deposits, including huge veins of iron, copper, cobalt, and gold. Also other industrial metals like lithium. This is big. Huge mining industry, especially in lithium. They're going to need that for batteries, especially in these new electric cars and stuff they got coming up. $3 trillion Afghanistan mining industry. Now, I'm going to talk about first mover advantage. Bonds, treasury bonds, United States government, And I'm going to link all this together for you, and I'm going to show you how this affects Bitcoin, what's going on in Afghanistan. And also, I'm going to explain to you about U.S. Treasury bonds. You know why they call them treasury bonds? Because going back in history, a kingdom, like they had a king, and a kingdom, they would have a treasury, and the treasury would be a big room full of gold. Just picture it in your mind, all these big heaps of gold, and this was the treasury of the king, and this was the treasury of the kingdom, and so they had this big treasury full of gold. Well, they've carried these old school thoughts into the modern world. It's still there, the United States Treasury, and at the core of the United States Treasury is a place called Fort Knox, where they supposedly have this big treasure room full of gold. Well, they're counting I think it's 8 or 9,000 tons or whatever of gold in Fort Knox. But is the gold really there? Now, let's take a look here at this article. Now, remember about Afghanistan and their mining industry, huge mining industry in Afghanistan. But the United States of America has first mover advantage. They have the legitimacy of having the most powerful treasury bonds on earth that everybody wants, because it's backed by the full faith of the United States Treasury and the United States government. So what they're counting on is this treasury. And nevertheless, treasury or not, the United States is $22 trillion in debt. This means that they are a bankrupt entity, but nevertheless, they have first mover advantage. So remember, first mover advantage is very important. When you're looking at cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin and Litecoin, of the ones that people like to hodl, those are the ones people like to hodl, have first mover advantage. So remember how important first mover advantage really is. So it says, doubts about America's official gold holdings in the U.S. Reserve audit. And it goes on to talk in this article about how there's very much doubts about that Fort Knox actually has the gold in it that they say they have. Now, nobody's arguing that there's not gold in Fort Knox. But what kind of gold is it? Is it the thousands of tons, they say, of pure 999 gold stored in many different vaults that have never had an audit and have been sealed forever and nobody even knows what's in there? Is that what's in there? Or is it a few bars that they melted down after they confiscated the gold, when they took in all those gold coins and they melted them into bars and it made a coppery looking gold, and they put that into a vault and they let everybody in to see it with a lot of publicity in the last audit, and that's all that's there, which is a much less amount. But nobody's arguing that there's not gold there, but what kind of gold is it? Well, if you check into the evidence, I'm not going to go into this in a long detail about what's in Fort Knox, but if you really take a look at the evidence really hard, it probably suggests that the gold at Fort Knox is those coins that they confiscated when they repriced gold. and that they smelted them down into bars that have a coppery look to them. And they've been keeping that at Fort Knox, gathering dust in heaps, but it's probably not near the amount that they say they have. But this is what backs the U.S. Treasuries. Probably a very small amount of gold, and then a humongous amount of debt. But remember, the United States has first mover advantage on legitimacy. Countries like Afghanistan don't have that. They don't have that legitimacy. So let's take a look here at this. Let's go and take a look at this article here. This article says Afghanistan and Tunisia are to issue sovereign bonds. Now, in order to issue sovereign bonds, they have to have legitimacy. And if they can't gain that legitimacy from the actual part of their country that is like in their finance sector and things like that, then how are they going to gain legitimacy in order to issue bonds? Well, it's giving you a hint here in this article. They're going to use Bitcoin as legitimacy, or an underlying asset, to actually be able to move forward and issue sovereign bonds. So the answer's there, but it's in Bitcoin. So suddenly, if these countries start to use, like Afghanistan and Tunisia, start to issue sovereign bonds based in Bitcoin, right? They're using the Bitcoin as legitimacy, but at the same time, the Bitcoin, their assets that the country hold, are giving the Bitcoin legitimacy. So it says Afghanistan and Tunisia are planning to issue sovereign bonds in Bitcoin to fund infrastructure developments, reported Asia Times from IMF's spring meeting summit. The governor of the Central Bank of Afghanistan confirmed that they were looking to utilize cryptocurrency and blockchain technology to raise around $5.8 billion. They said that they would pair Bitcoin with a form of metal futures such as lithium. So what they're going to do is they're going to pair their own assets together, lithium, along with Bitcoin. And it says this move would make it easier for Afghanistan to expose its $3 trillion... what did we just say? $3 trillion lithium sector. So basically, what they're going to do is they're going to expose something that has an awful lot more actual value than probably the gold in Fort Knox. And they're going to be exposing this to Bitcoin to gain legitimacy in order to form treasury bonds. And so what they're going to do is they're going to offer these new treasury bonds. Afghanistan is to expose its $3 trillion, that's $3,000 billion lithium sector to investors across the world. And this metal is in short supply against a booming demand in the electric vehicle industry. It would pose profitable opportunities to Afghanistan. So we see Bitcoin branching out now. We see it branching out as a base or a structure for support for sovereign bonds to be written on. Well, that's what the U.S. Treasury was supposed to do with Fort Knox. Fort Knox was supposed to be the basis of support for the entire United States financial system that they issue treasury bonds on. So we see Bitcoin now acting as this level or floor for support for treasury bonds to be written on. This is something that gold used to use as gold's position. A treasury, at one time, was always backed by gold, or a treasury room where they kept full of gold. Now it appears where we have Bitcoin can become the treasury. Right? You see where we're moving with this? Bitcoin is more fluid, too, than real gold. In other words, what I mean by more fluid is the treasury room was always susceptible This is why they kept it well guarded. Take a look even at the modern day treasury rooms that are full of gold bars, like Fort Knox. They make jokes about Fort Knox. They say, "Oh, you ever tried? Is somebody going to try to get into Fort Knox?" They use that as like they say, "Oh, it's your place, your house you just built. You know, you've put all kinds of alarm systems in and stuff. It's just like Fort Knox." They would say, you know. In other words, it's secure. They have to secure the gold at Fort Knox. You can't get anywhere near that place because it's so secure, such a secure facility. This harkens back to the days of kings, and they'd have a treasury room, and it would always be a guarded place in the castle where nobody could get in near it. They don't want anybody to steal the gold. But here, all of a sudden, we got this new asset that's so fluid and can become the basis. The basis for like a treasury, the same job a treasury would do, but it's so fluid it can be transferred around the world, and you don't need guards to guard it. You can have a wallet, and its security is just its passcodes and its encryption. Which do you think is better? But now we see Bitcoin making the transition and starting to become an underlying asset to be used to write treasury bonds for these countries. These are the first countries evidently jumping on this ship, jumping on this boat, along with the bankers now are starting to jump on the boat. It's only a matter of time. You can see this transition already starting. It starts with one or two countries like this, and then it starts to spread out to more small countries that are getting in debt problems, say like Italy, for instance. What happens when this Italian crisis finally comes to a head and the European Union starts to fragment? The euro starts to go down in flames. What happens then? Italy's going to be faced with a choice. Now, by the time Italy has to face that choice, it might be 6 months from now, it might be 2 years from now, but we'll eventually get to the point where Italy is crumbling to the point where the European Union cannot support it anymore, and it's going to be left to a choice. The people will be upset because they can't feed their families. They'll probably want some sort of referendum to leave the European Union. Even though we see Britain being punished for leaving the European Union, if these countries get in a desperate situation, they will vote to leave anyway. And then they're faced with a choice. Hey, you know what? What are we going to do here? Are we going to go back to our old currency, the lira? And have the lira go to zero? And have the country fall into mass chaos? Or do we take our treasury or whatever and form it together and legitimize it using Bitcoin as some sort of a backer for our country so that we can start to continue on again? You know, this is the situation we're facing. Listen, folks, thank you for listening to this episode of the Delta Report and this cryptocurrency update on what's going on in the world of Bitcoin. I'm just going to go over the price real quick right now of Bitcoin, and we're looking at 52.41 today. It's holding above above $5,000 for such a long period of time now. I'm starting to doubt whether we're going to start to break down to new lows, and I'm starting to think, hey, you know what? This might be it. It might not get any better than this. I can't tell you any financial advice, but all I can tell you is what I do is I start to think to myself, hey, you know what? What if this thing starts to move up and it doesn't go back down anymore? And I said to myself, I better get some. So I ran in yesterday and got a little bit of Bitcoin. But here's the thing. I always give you guys advice. I say to you, don't spend more money on cryptocurrency than you can afford to lose. Well, yesterday I spent a little bit more than I can afford to lose, you know. But I'm not going to fret it, you know. And I spent it because I think that Bitcoin is actually, I really believe myself that it's might be at its bottom right now, and it might not get it any cheaper, you know, and it might start to go up. And I see the upside potential far outweighs, in my mind, the downside risk. So I can only tell you what I'm doing, you know. I can't tell you guys to go out and risk your hard-earned money on this asset. I can tell you to be careful, because what I can tell you is gold and silver are an awful lot more safe bet than cryptocurrencies. But on the other side of that coin is risk versus rewards. You know what I mean? Anyway, listen, you guys have a great day, and we'll catch you guys later. Bye-bye.